Moving right along, I mentioned photosynthetic bacteria already. So they are obviously extremely small. Bacteria are always extremely small. And we will see something called allometric scaling later on, which means we want to know how the total biomass of some species compares to the total biomass of another species. So let's say you compare flies to elephants. So in the ocean, bacteria, obviously microscopic, cannot be seen easily from satellites and so on. They may be actually responsible for half of the total photosynthetic biomass in the ocean. That's a lot, right? So they also exert critical influence on the marine ecosystem if they are that productive and contribute that much to the total primary production. Very little remains known. There are actually also huge biomass of viruses in the ocean. So one of the least understood topics remains, just to digress for a minute, is the impact of ocean warming because of global warming on bacteria and viruses in the ocean, not just photosynthetic bacteria but other bacteria, and the disease pressure. On land, we know that global warming is causing health issues, not only because of air quality and water quality, but also just because microbes grow faster in warmer temperatures and so on. And mosquitoes move with temperatures, so even at higher latitudes you are now getting more mosquito populations, which means more mosquito-borne tropical diseases coming into mid-latitudes, right? Like chikungunya and the Lyme disease and so on. Anyways, regional primary productivity variations are important. So values of these range. Remember we said we look at grams per meter squared or milligram per meter cube and so on. So the range goes from 1 gram carbon per meter squared per year. So it's always carbon because we are looking at how much inorganic carbon is getting converted into organic carbon. That's always primary production, right? So the values can go from as little as 1 gram carbon per meter squared per year. So you're looking at annual primary production per square meter of the ocean area, to 4,000 grams of carbon fixed per meter squared in a year. Okay, so the uneven distribution obviously is related to mostly nutrients. The seasonality we will see later on will be related to the availability of sunlight, and the changes in sunlight can also affect the productivity, like in the Indian Ocean during the monsoon. Lots of cloud cover obviously is going to affect sunlight. So even though you're in the tropics and you think of it as sunny places, monsoon regions can have months and months of clouds and affect primary production. And it can be competition because the monsoon season also produces strong upwelling because of the southwesterly winds off of Somalia. Remember, the Somali current is very strong and there is strong upwelling in the summer months. So upwelling and nutrients available, clouds suppressing the light and so on and so forth. So there's always a competition. 90% of the biomass happens in the euphoric zone, but it doesn't, 100% of it is produced in the euphoric zone, very little below that, but 90% of the euphoric zone production is decomposed before it goes very far. Okay, why is that important? Remember we talked about stuff that makes it all the way to the bottom of the ocean, carbon that gets sequestered or respired and so on. Every molecule of primary production that makes it to the bottom of the ocean and gets buried is a carbon molecule that is taken away from the atmosphere. So it's carbon sequestration by the ocean. Okay, so it turns out that obviously there are heterotrophs which will eat all this photosynthesis. So 90% is used up. Let's make a quick comparison of land versus ocean. We've been talking about primary production. I think you have a good sense of the food chain on land, right? You have lots of primary production, which there are some estimates on how much of the primary production is actually used up by human beings on land. But we also use it indirectly in the sense we feed the cows grains and grass and so on. That's primary production from agriculture and natural. And we eat the meat, right? So there is primary production, and there is secondary production and tertiary production, and so on. So if you look at the primary production ranges, let's just focus on the range and not or the average. Algae beds and coral reefs are very productive, so they have about 2,000 grams carbon per meter square per year. Estuaries are productive. Upwelling zones are productive. Open ocean upwelling zones are productive. In general, open ocean is not very productive. Continental shelves are productive. Open ocean, the blue regions of the ocean under the subtropical gyres are basically deserts of the ocean, right? So if you compare to land, freshwater swamps and marsh have slightly more average primary production than the most productive ocean regions. Tropical rainforests are, of course, lot of biodiversity, lot of primary production. Mid-latitude forests and cultivated land. So obviously cultivated land is very ineffective, but nonetheless it's what we eat, grains and vegetables and fruits and so on, right? But what is the difference? So primary production looks similar, but in the ocean you have a very long food chain. Photosynthesis is producing the carbohydrate. Zooplankton are eating it. Larger zooplankton will eat smaller zooplankton. Small fish will eat the zooplankton. Larger fish will eat smaller fish, and so on. So secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and so on. The production levels are many. So the production at other levels is much higher in the ocean than on land. Regional primary production variations, we will look at more details. Only 1% of the organic matter actually makes it all the way to the bottom of the ocean. If you're producing 100 units, only 1 unit will make it all the way to the bottom. So that tells you about the efficiency of the carbon cycle, carbon sequestration. We will look at that a little more detail later on. Okay, so the concept of biological pump is important. So I will do it in the next podcast because that's kind of what determines how much carbon is going into the ocean and how the nutrients are being moved up and down. And also we want to understand how global warming is going to affect the carbon pump of the ocean, because that determines how much carbon will continue to go into the ocean and not remain in the atmosphere. Remember, we said more than 90% of the energy, excess energy from global warming is going into the ocean, but ocean is also taking up greenhouse gases like CO2. If the efficiency goes down, then the accumulated carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to accelerate, which means global warming is going to accelerate. We don't want that, right? So we want the ocean to continue to take up the primary production. So we will see that in the next podcast. Important concepts, but we are adding many of them, so you must track them one by one. Make sure you understood all of them.